Hey guys, Travis Gillespie here. I'm a teacher, an instructional designer, and a programmer. Today we're going to be looking at JavaScript, and I'm going to show you a powerful tool called a for loop. I'll first walk you through the basics of for loops, and then I'll show you how you can actually ace an interview question using a for loop. And then third, I'll show you how for loops have actually helped me in my career, creating dynamic forms for my students. Now, if you're joining me in this class, I'm making the assumption that you understand some of the basics of programming, some HTML, CSS, and you could create a form in HTML if needed. So if you feel comfortable there, you're going to do great here. Let's get started. All right, let's talk about the basics of a for loop. And a for loop has three parts. The first part sets the index. The second part checks the condition. And the third part increments the index. Now I'm going to get some room up on the screen. Now what's going on down here in this for loop? In this first statement, I've declared a variable, I, and it's set equal to 0. I is our index variable, or our counter variable. It's going to help us keep track of where we are in our for loop. Now, I didn't have to use the letter I. I could have used any letter or any word. In fact, I like to think of I as an abbreviated version of the word index, because that's what we're working with. All right, so I'm going to go back to I as our variable, and make sure to end each statement with a semicolon. Now this second statement checks to see whether the condition is true or false. If it's true, the for loop will continue to run, and if it's false, it won't. In this case, as long as the value for I is less than the value 10, the for loop will continue to run. And again, I ended that statement with a semicolon. Now this third statement happens at the end of the for loop, and in this case it's incrementing the index by 1 each time. However, I could have chosen any value to increase by. In fact, I didn't have to increase by 1 or any value. I could also choose to decrease or decrement the index. However, in this case I would have to change a few things, like I'd have to change my starting value and also the condition as well. Instead of less than, I would be greater than 10. And then I would decrement the index at the end. But let's go back to what we had before. All right, so I have a skeleton for my for loop here, but I want it to do something. In fact, I want it to do something once and twice and 3 times, and I want it to do it over and over and over again until the condition's not true anymore. But right now, nothing's happening. I don't have anything inside the for loop. So let's take a break. So I want you to pause for a second and see if you can find a way to display the index values when the for loop is executed, and then check yes or no when you're ready to move on. Now there are a ton of different ways you could have approached this, and I guess it depends on what your overall goal or purpose is. But maybe one way you thought of was writing it out to the document, just display the value for I in the document. One of my favorites, and we're not going to look at it further in this problem, but I like to use the web inspector to write it out to the console. So you can try that one at home if you would like. Okay, so I haven't attached this file to anything, so I'm just going to copy this information, and I have a program running in the background that I'm going to use. It's called CodePen. I'm going to close these first 2 windows. They're not needed. And what I could do here is take that JavaScript we just created and paste it in here for this JS JavaScript section. And the cool thing about this is you just saw some numbers pop up here to the side. This is a live preview window, so anything that gets typed in, I can check my work instantly. It's awesome. So I'm going to cover that back up and talk about what's happening over here in the for loop. So the initial value for I is set to 0. The condition, 0 is less than 10, is true, so we run through the for loop. The value 0 for I gets written to the document. I gets incremented by 1 at the end of the for loop. And now we run through the process again. This time, I equals 1. The condition 1 is less than 10 is true. The value 1 gets written out to the document, and I increments by 1 again. At some point, I is going to reach the value 9. 9 is less than 10. This is a true condition. So you can guess. 9 gets written out to the document, and I increases by 1 again. Finally, I is equal to 10. The condition is checked. 10 is less than 10, produces a false statement, so we exit out of the for loop. Nothing gets written to the document. All right, so let's move on from this problem here and jump into our next section, which comes from this book, Eloquent JavaScript. And we're going to take a look at chapter 2 in just a second here, but before we do, I want to take a look at this link called Code Sandbox. And if you were to tap on that link, it's going to take you to this page where you can actually work on the exercises in the book, which I think is pretty cool. So let's jump into chapter 2 now. Now, in chapter 2, there's a problem called FizzBuzz, and there's a lot of information here. I'm not going to read it all right now. I've broken up the important stuff, and we'll look at it in a second. What I think is pretty cool is the authors are telling you right here that this is an actual question that's used in interviews. And if you want to work on this problem right here on the page, you can. Just double tap and start typing. Okay, let's go look at the important stuff. Okay, so I've parsed the problem and broken it up into a few parts. The first part's saying, hey, print all the numbers from 1 to 100 with the following exceptions. Right away, I'm thinking for loop. The first exception says, print the word fizz for numbers divisible by 3. The second says, print buzz for numbers divisible by 5 and not 3. The third says, print fizz buzz for numbers divisible by 3 and 5. Okay, so this looks like a lot of work here. So before we even worry about the 3 exceptions, let's just focus on that first part, printing the numbers from 1 to 100. This would be a good place to pause the video and try to print those numbers out yourself using a for loop. Press play when you're ready to move forward. So if you use the last problem as a stepping stone to build a solution for this problem, great, you're on the right track, but be careful. You may have made a couple of mistakes. So let's go ahead and just copy this information. I want to take this over to the web inspector and just print it out real quick and see what happens. Well, if we look at the starting value, we started with the value 0, I is equal to 0, and ended on 99. But our first task is to print the numbers from 1 to 100, not 0 to 99. So how can we fix this? I'm going to go ahead and delete this information and just cover it up real quick. Let's set the index equal to 1, not 0. I want my condition to reach 100. Let's set it to I is less than or equal to 100. Now I++ is a typical way to increment by 1, but it's not the only solution. Here are some other techniques. I+ equals 1 increases the value by 1. Plus I increments by 1 also. I'll stick with what I originally had. Now if we take this information and copy it again, and go back over to the web inspector, and I print that information out, now I'm printing the numbers 1 all the way down to 100. Great, so task 1 is complete. Okay, so I only want to print the word fizz if the value for I is divisible by 3. Otherwise, I'll print the value for I. So let's walk through this together. The first time I run through the for loop, I is set equal to 1. 1 is less than or equal to 100. That's a true condition. So I'm going to jump into the for loop. Notice I have a variable here, word. It's set equal to an empty string. Since 1 is not divisible by 3, 3 doesn't go into 1 an even number of times, I'm going to skip over this section and do what comes next. Set the variable word equal to 1. Then I'm going to write that value out to the console. Notice right now I have the value for I being printed out to the console. I'll change that in a minute to the variable word. Okay, I've run into the end of my for loop. I is going to increase by 1, and I'll jump back up to the top. This time, I is set equal to 2. 2 is less than or equal to 100. The variable word is set equal to an empty string again. Since 2 is not divisible by 3, I'm going to skip over this section and jump to the next section. Word is going to be set to the value 2 this time, and that will be logged out to the console. I is going to increment by 1 again, and we'll jump back to the top of the for loop. This time I is set equal to 3. 3 is less than or equal to 100. Word is set equal to an empty string. This time in the if statement, 3 is divisible by 3. 3 goes into 3 an even number of times. This time I'm going to concatenate the word fizz onto the variable word. I'm going to skip over the next section and do whatever comes next. Right now, console.log, again, it's going to log the value for I in the console. Okay, the variable word is going to print to the console now. We'll run into the end of the for loop. I will increment by 1 again, and we'll keep going through this process until I reaches a value that will produce a false condition. So now we want to print the word buzz only if the value is divisible by 5. I'm going to go and fix that real quick. Okay, let's build upon our last model and visualize this. I'm going to set I equal to 4 this time. Since 4 is less than or equal to 100, we're going to jump into the for loop. The variable word, it's an empty string. 4 is not divisible by 3, so we're going to skip to the next section. 4 is not divisible by 5, we'll skip to the next section, and we'll set the variable word equal to 4. That prints out to the console. I increases by 1. We'll jump back up to the top of the for loop. I is set equal to 5. 5 is less than or equal to 100. Word is an empty string. 5 is not divisible by 3. We'll skip to the next section. 5 is divisible by 5, so we'll concatenate the word buzz onto the variable word. We'll skip over any other sections. We'll log the value of word out to the console. I will increase by 1. I is set equal to 6 this time. 6 is less than or equal to 100. Word is equal to an empty string. 6 is divisible by 3, so we'll concatenate fizz onto the variable word. We'll log that information out to the console. I will increase again by 1, and I think you see the picture of what's starting to happen here. Okay, so let's see what happens when we run into the value 15 right now. 15 is divisible by 3 and 5. I'm going to jump into the for loop. This if statement's going to check to see if 15 is divisible by 3. It's going to say, yep, it sure is. It's going to concatenate fizz onto word, and it's going to skip over the other two sections and log that out to the console. But we need to fix this and find a solution for part 3 of this problem. Okay, so this last part, print the word fizzbuzz for numbers that are divisible by 3 and 5, so like that number 15. Let's go back and take a look at how we can do this. Okay, so in order to do this, I created a condition at the top that was going to check to see if the value for I was divisible by both 3 and 5. I used the double ampersand symbols to represent and when checking this condition. So let's jump into the for loop. When I is set equal to 15, 15 is less than or equal to 100, word is an empty string, we're going to run into that if statement. 15 is divisible by 3, and 15 is divisible by 5. Fizzbuzz will concatenate onto word. We'll skip over these other sections, log that information out to the console. I will increase by 1, and we'll jump back up to the top of the for loop again. Great, so we've completed this problem, but the code's a bit clunky. Let's take a break and see what we can do about that. Remember, the best code is brief. So in this problem, I want to see if you can refactor the code I just wrote and produce the same result using less. This would be a good time to pause the video, check yes or no when you're ready to move on. All I've really done is gotten rid of some of the extra load associated with the last solution. Since there's only one statement under each of the if conditions, I don't even really need those curly braces, but I like to keep them there just to play it safe. And let's go through this real quick. If the value for I is divisible by 3, we'll log fizz out to the console. If the value for I is divisible by 5, we'll log buzz out to the console. Now here's the cool one. What happens when we run into that number 15? Well, we're going to jump into that first if condition. 15 is divisible by 3, so we'll concatenate fizz onto the variable word. But we're going to run into the next if statement. This is a new condition. Since 15 is divisible by 5, we're going to concatenate buzz onto whatever word is set equal to. Right now it's set equal to fizz. So now I'm going to get fizz buzz again, and I'll log that out to the console. And then finally, down here at the bottom, I'm either going to log the value for word out to the console, or I'll log I out to the console instead. Alright, so we're done with this problem. Let's move on to the last section. Now if you're building forms, and you know you have some kind of repeated task where you're putting similar tags or elements into the form, maybe they have a slight variation, you might want a quicker solution to getting that form built. Now when my students have an assignment and I'm building a form for them, some assignments might have 3 problems, some 5, 10, 20, 50, 100. I don't want to manually repeat those tasks. So I'm going to think of a solution to get that job done faster. I'm going to get rid of the form in this document, and I'm going to build the form in this JavaScript file. Later I'll call on this file to create the form. This may be a good time to pause the video and practice what you've learned already. Here's a problem to help you get started. Create a for loop that displays any length of numbers. Now, you could choose the numbers 0 through 10 or 1 through 100 like we did earlier, or you could choose the numbers 15 through 1033. Since I don't know which numbers you're going to choose, there's a catch, and I'll give you a hint. Replace the numbers in the second statement with a variable. You may have noticed that I used x as the index variable this time, rather than I as I've been using in the past. And rather than putting a number in the second statement, I wanted you to put a variable in that place. So how can we go about doing that? Let's create a variable and put it here. And we can check to see if that worked. Sure enough, it does. So I've got a for loop working, but I'm trying to create a form, and I've got to call on this for loop. I've got to access it somehow from the HTML file. So let's go back here. Looks like I need to zoom out just one here. I'm going to save this file and refresh the page. Great, so I'm just going to briefly talk about what each of these tags do. That input tag determines how many problems or solutions to problems will be on the form. So if I wanted that form to have 6 problems, I type 6 into that field, or if I wanted it to have 9, I just type 9 in, and so on. That reload button is going to help me just refresh the page or clear the form if I mess up and need to start over. And that submit button, when I click that, that's where all the magic happens. It's going to call a function called create form, and create form is going to actually create the form for us. So we need to somehow get access to this function create form. So let's go back to our JavaScript file, and we're going to break for just a minute. Before I show you my solution, I challenge you to work through this last problem. Can you find a way to attach a form and its elements to HTML using JavaScript? Press pause now if you're going to take the challenge and select yes or no when you're ready to move forward. Okay, so when submit was hit, a function called createForm will be called, so I'm going to put the for loop inside of that function. Okay, so now before I move forward here, I want to make sure that when I invoke this function, I'm actually running through this for loop. So I'm going to go ahead and reload this page, and now when I click submit, I should, print out all 216 values here, great. But I don't know that I'm always going to have 216 as my number. I actually want to print out the number that's typed in this field. So I'm going to move this out of the way. So I'm going to set num equal to whatever the value is inside of that input field. Save the page. I'm going to bring this back on screen, and let's clear that out. I need to go ahead and reload this page. Now when I type a number into the field, let's just type in 15 or something. I can press submit, and now I'm only printing out 15 values. Great. So each time the for loop's being called this time, I'm going to create some form elements, give them some attributes, and I'll append them to the HTML document. And outside of the for loop, I'm creating a button that allows me just to clear the form or start all over, because I'm not going to submit this form to anybody. I'm going to save that file. Let's go over here and reload the page. And now let's try typing a number in. I'm going to just try 12 real quick. Click submit. Now I have a form with 12 problems on it. If I've messed up and want to reload or just start over, I can try typing in another number. Let's try 17. Click submit. And now I have a form with 17 problems on it. Cool, so you can see that for loops are a powerful tool that help you accomplish repeated tasks quickly. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in another video.